Long before maps gave it a name, Greenland was already listening. It listened to the wind scraping the ice, to the slow creaking of glaciers older than memory, and to the quiet footsteps of the first people who learned how to survive where almost nothing forgives. Thousands of years ago, Arctic peoples crossed frozen passages from North America, bringing with them patience, skill, and an intimate knowledge of snow, sea, and silence. Their descendants, the Inuit, who call their land Kalaalleq Nunat, the land of the people, learned to read the ice the way others read books. The land was harsh, but it was honest. Then, around the year 985, ships appeared on the horizon. They came from Iceland, led by Norse settlers seeking new beginnings. They called the land Greenland, a hopeful name, perhaps meant to attract others, perhaps meant to convince themselves. For centuries, Viking communities lived on the edge of the ice, farming fragile soil and trading with Europe. Eventually, the cold tightened its grip, trade faded, and the Norse vanished, leaving behind stone ruins and unanswered questions. Greenland remained. In the centuries that followed, the island drifted in and out of European awareness, claimed and reclaimed, until it became tied to Denmark, a relationship that still shapes its present. Yet Greenland was never merely owned. It endured, quietly asserting itself through its people, language, and traditions. Today, Greenland stands at a crossroads. The ice that once defined it is changing. Glaciers retreat, ancient ground emerges, and the world suddenly looks north with new urgency. Climate change has made Greenland visible again, not as a myth, not as a blank space on a map, but as a key to the planet's future. And still the land listens to the voices of its people seeking greater self-determination, to the crack of ice meeting warmer seas, to the long memory of survival etched into stone and snow. Greenland is not a place that rushes, teaches slowness, endurance, and humility, a reminder that some lands do not exist to be conquered, only respected. There comes a time each year when the sun simply decides not to return. In Greenland, this absence is not feared. It is endured, even respected. The polar night stretches across weeks, sometimes months, and the world becomes a place of blue shadows and starlight. The land does not sleep, but it grows quieter, as if holding its breath. Inside small homes, lamps glow warmly against the dark. People gather, talk less, listen more. Stories are told not for entertainment, but for survival. Reminders that light has always come back before, that the cold has been faced and outlasted by generations before them. Outside, the ice sings, cracks, shifts, complains. These sounds are not accidents, they are messages. Those who live here learn to hear them, to know when the ice is strong enough to trust and when it is wiser to wait. In the long night, time changes its meaning. Days lose their edges. Patience becomes a skill as essential as food or warmth. And somewhere beneath the frozen sky, Greenland waits. Calm, unmoving, certain that the sun sooner or later will remember the way home. When the darkness begins to loosen its grip, the sea is the first to answer. Along Greenland's vast coastline, water is never just water. It is a living archive. It remembers every kayak that has cut through it, every hunt that fed a family, every storm that took something away. The Inuit have always known this. That is why they do not challenge the sea. They negotiate with it. In early spring, the ice starts to speak differently. What was once solid and trustworthy grows unpredictable. Hunters read its color, its texture, the way light moves across its surface. Faint shimmer might mean danger. A dull, chalky white might mean safety. Survival depends not on strength, but on attention. Kayaks return to the water like old friends. Built from bone, wood, and skin in earlier times, they were designed not to dominate the sea, but to belong to it. A good hunter moved as quietly as a thought, leaving no trace but a widening ripple behind him. Silence was respect. Noise was arrogance. Whales pass offshore, vast and ancient, following routes older than human memory. Seals surface briefly, watching, judging. Nothing here is accidental. Everything participates in a balance that can tip with frightening ease. And above it all, the land rises sharply. Mountains cut like broken teeth against the sky. They do not soften with distance. They do not invite conquest. They stand as witnesses, indifferent to ambition, patient beyond comprehension. Greenland teaches this lesson repeatedly. You may live here, but only if you learn to listen. Those who forget are quickly reminded. The sea does not forgive carelessness. The ice does not explain itself twice. Yet for those who understand, who move slowly and observe deeply, Greenland offers something rare. A sense of belonging that does not come from ownership, but from harmony. A quiet agreement between human breath and frozen world. And as spring edges closer, as the sun lingers a little longer each day, the sea continues to remember, carrying forward the stories of those who learned how to move through it without ever trying to control it. As the light strengthens, Greenland reveals what winter hides. The land emerges slowly, reluctantly, like an old creature stretching its limbs after a long sleep. Rock appears first, dark, ancient, scarred by ice that has scraped it for millennia. There is almost no soil, no softness. Everything solid here has been earned. Wind becomes the constant companion. It does not rush. It persists. It moves through valleys and along cliffs with a steady insistence, shaping both landscape and people. In Greenland, patience is not a virtue. It is a requirement. Those who fight the wind waste their strength. Those who accept it learn when to move and when to wait. Villages cling to the coastline, small and deliberate. Houses are painted in deep reds, blues, yellows, not for beauty alone but for survival. In a white world, color is orientation. Color is reassurance. Color is a quiet declaration. Someone lives here. Life follows rhythms set not by clocks, but by weather and light. When the sea allows, people fish. When it refuses, they repair nets, tools, boats. Nothing is rushed because rushing is dangerous. Every action is measured against consequence. Children grow up learning limits early. They learn where they may walk, when the ice can be trusted, how quickly conditions can turn. Fear is not dramatized. It is taught calmly like mathematics. Respect replaces panic. And everywhere there is stone. Stone that has never moved. Stone that has seen ice come and go. Stone that reminds everyone living here that human time is brief. Greenland does not promise comfort. It offers something rarer, clarity. In this place you know exactly what matters. Warmth, food, community, awareness. Everything else becomes noise, carried away by the wind. And as summer approaches, brief, luminous, almost unreal, the land does not soften. It simply allows itself to be seen a little more clearly, as if saying, "This is who I am. Stay if you can live with the truth." Then, almost without warning, summer arrives. Does not knock. Does not announce itself properly. One day, the sun simply refuses to leave the sky, circling endlessly, low and golden, as if afraid to disappear again. The darkness that once ruled for months dissolves into memory, and Greenland changes character. Not its nature but its mood. Snow retreats into shadows and high ground. Valleys soften. Tiny flowers push through cracks in stone, absurdly fragile, stubbornly alive. Their colors feel almost shocking after so much white and gray, like a secret revealed too brightly. This season is short and everyone knows it. People move with quiet urgency, not haste but intention. Boats are repaired. Nets are cast. Hunting and fishing intensify, because summer is generosity with a deadline. What is gathered now must last through the long return of darkness. Children stay outside until sleep overtakes them. There is no night to send them home. Time stretches, bends, loses authority. Meals happen when hunger speaks. Rest happens when bodies finally insist. The land hums instead of sleeps. Meltwater rushes through hidden channels, carving paths beneath the ice. Glaciers shed pieces of themselves into the sea with deep, echoing cracks. Not violent, but inevitable. These sounds remind everyone that even the most permanent things are always in motion. In this light, Greenland feels almost gentle. But it is a gentleness without illusion. Storms can still rise quickly. Fog can erase distance and direction in minutes. The sea remains alert, watchful. Summer is not forgiveness. It is opportunity. Elders watch closely. They measure changes against memory. They notice when ice breaks earlier than it used to, when animals arrive late or not at all. The land is speaking differently now, and its language is changing. Still, for a while there is warmth on the skin. People sit outside their homes, facing the water, not talking much. Words feel unnecessary under a sun that never sets. Presence is enough. Existence, briefly, feels uncomplicated. Greenland allows this moment. Not as a promise. Not as a reward. But as a reminder that endurance can include beauty. Fleeting, intense, and all the more precious because it cannot last. And slowly, almost politely, the sun begins to dip again. The miracle withdraws. Winter is already thinking its way back. No one remembers exactly when the rumors began. Only that they always started the same way, with a fisherman who stopped talking. His name was Akaluk, a man known along the coast for patience rather than luck. He fished alone, preferred long silences, and trusted old methods. On the morning it happened, the sea was calm in a way that felt wrong. Too flat, too still, like a held breath. He cast his line just before the fog rolled in. First the pull felt ordinary. Heavy, yes, but steady. Akaluk leaned back, adjusting his stance, letting the line work. Then the resistance changed. Did not fight like a fish. Did not run. It hung on the line, dragging downward with a slow, deliberate weight, as if something below had noticed him. The kayak rocked once, then again. When the line finally broke the surface, Akaluk did not shout. He did not swear. He did not move at all. What emerged was not fully solid, nor fully liquid. Its skin, if it could be called skin, shimmered like oil beneath ice, stretched thin over a shape that refused to settle into form. Parts of it resembled fish, others something older, unfinished. Eyes, too many badly placed, opened and closed without blinking as if testing the air. The smell came first. Ancient, cold, like deep water trapped beneath glaciers for thousands of years. The thing did not thrash. It observed. Akaluk cut the line. Later, when he returned to shore, his kayak was empty of nets and catch. He walked past the village without greeting anyone, went straight into his house and closed the door. He did not come out for 3 days. When he finally spoke, his voice was wrong, thin, stretched as if forced through ice. He said only this: "There are things the sea kept because we were not meant to finish them." After that, Akaluk never fished again. Stranger things followed. Nets came up shredded from below. Dogs refused to go near the shoreline at night. Once, during the low sun of late summer, someone swore they saw a shape moving beneath the ice. Not swimming but waiting. The elders did not argue. They listened, and then they did something rare. They stopped going out to sea for a while. Because Greenland remembers everything. And sometimes when the ice loosens and the old depths breathe again, it offers back what should have remained untouched. Unfinished thoughts of nature, dragged briefly into the light, only to sink once more into the dark. The sea grew calm again, but no one trusted it the same way after that. After Akaluk, the village changed its habits without ever admitting why. Boats still went out, but never alone. Nets were hauled faster, with eyes fixed on the water rather than the horizon. No one fished at dusk anymore. And at night, when the sea should have been silent, people began to hear sounds that did not belong to waves. Slow, hollow knocks, as if something far below were testing the underside of the world. The ice responded first. Old hunters noticed fractures where none had existed before. Long, unnatural lines spreading outward, not with the randomness of pressure, but with intention. The ice no longer sang, it murmured. Low vibrations traveled through it, felt more in the bones than heard in the ears. Then the animals began to leave. Seals abandoned familiar routes. Birds nested further inland, restless and loud, as if warning something unseen. Even the dogs, creatures bred for cold and endurance, whimpered in their sleep, waking suddenly, staring at the doors. One evening, as fog swallowed the coastline, a boy went missing. They found him hours later, standing at the edge of the ice, barefoot, skin blue with cold, eyes wide and empty. He did not resist when they carried him home. He did not cry. When his mother asked what he had seen, he answered in a voice too old for him, "It is learning our shape." That night, the sea rose without wind. Water climbed onto the shore, slow and heavy, dragging ice with it. Shapes moved beneath the surface, not fast, not chaotic, but coordinated like thoughts assembling themselves. For a moment, the boundary between solid and liquid ceased to mean anything. The elders gathered. They spoke of stories never told to children, of things formed when the world was still deciding what should exist, of mistakes sealed beneath ice because there was nowhere else to put them. They said the glaciers were not only ice, they were locks. And now the locks were failing. Akaluk was found dead at dawn. No marks, no struggle, only his eyes open, staring upward, mouth filled with seawater that smelled impossibly deep. On the wall above his bed, written in salt-stained fingerprints, were uneven words no one recognized, symbols that hurt to look at for too long. From that day on, the sea stopped giving food. Nets came up empty. Lines snapped without tension. The water had become selective. It was no longer feeding the village. It was measuring it. And beneath the ice, something patient and unfinished was rising, piece by piece, learning how to belong to the surface. Greenland did not resist. Never does. It simply watches, enduring as it always has, even when what returns from the deep is not meant to endure at all. It was never just one thing. That was the mistake everyone made at first, imagining the aberration as a creature, a body, something that could be named, hunted, or killed. But what Akaluk had pulled from the water was only a fragment, a surface symptom of something far larger, older, and unfinished. The elders understood too late. The sea did not give birth to it. The sea was only the mouth. As the weeks passed, the changes accelerated. Coastal ice thinned from below, eaten not by warmth but by movement. Entire shelves collapsed silently at night, vanishing without the thunder they should have made. Water temperatures dropped unnaturally fast, burning skin on contact, as if the cold itself had sharpened. Then came the sickness. People began to feel it first in their sleep. Dreams filled with pressure, with depths, with a sensation of being watched from underneath their own thoughts. They woke exhausted, noses bleeding lightly, ears ringing as if from distant horns. Some stopped dreaming altogether. Others dreamed only of water. Those who went missing were never found. Not drowned, taken. The aberration had learned something essential. Greenland survives because it is sparse. Small communities, vast distances, isolation. And so it adapted not to attack openly, but to disconnect. Radio signals failed first. Then satellites lost clarity over the island. Magnetic instruments spun uselessly near the coast. Greenland began to slide out of the world's attention, as if something were bending perception around it. And beneath the ice it grew. Not vertically, but laterally, spreading through submerged caverns, old meltwater channels, fault lines beneath the seabed. It did not need to surface. It reached inland through pressure, vibration, resonance. People living kilometers from the coast felt it in their bones, a low-frequency hum that made teeth ache and thoughts blur. The thing did not want conquest. It wanted replacement. Animals born during this period were wrong. Fish with translucent flesh. Birds that flew in tight, spiraling patterns until they dropped from the sky. Dogs that turned on their handlers without warning, eyes glassy, as if listening to something else. The elders gathered one last time. They agreed on what no one wanted to say aloud. This was not an invasion. This was a correction. The aberration was a remnant of a world that almost was, a version of nature that had been sealed away when life chose a different shape. And now, as the ice weakened, it was returning to finish its attempt. Greenland was ideal. Few people. Extreme conditions. A population already adapted to endurance rather than resistance. If it succeeded here, nothing would stop it from moving outward, following cold currents, reshaping coastlines quietly, patiently. The final sign came when the sea froze in midsummer. Perfectly still. Perfectly smooth. A lid sealing something that was almost ready. Those who understood began to leave, knowing most would not make it far. Those who stayed stopped speaking of survival and started speaking of memory. Of ensuring someone somewhere would know what had happened when the ice finally opened again. Because when the aberration rises fully, it will not destroy Greenland in fire or chaos. It will erase it gently. And the world, looking too late toward the north, will wonder why an entire land went silent, unaware that the silence was not absence but occupation. The warning did not come as sound. Not at first. It arrived as understanding. People across the coast woke on the same night, sitting upright in their beds, hearts racing, mouths tasting of salt. No words had been spoken aloud, yet everyone knew the same message, complete and unmistakable, pressed directly into their thoughts like a hand against thin ice. It was aware of them now, and it was finished waiting. Those closest to the sea felt it most clearly. A presence rose beneath the villages, vast and distributed, not centered in one place but everywhere at once. The pressure in the head became unbearable, like diving too deep without air. Then the meaning sharpened. You are standing on my feeding ground. The ice along the shoreline darkened, veins spreading through it like bruises. Water receded unnaturally far, exposing seabed no one had ever seen. Rocks scored with grooves too precise to be geological, as if something enormous had been dragged repeatedly across it. Again the thought pressed in, colder, clearer. This place sustains me. You interrupt that. The elders tried to speak, to respond with ritual, with apology, with a careful respect their people had always shown the land and sea. But this thing did not understand reverence. It understood only function. Images followed the words. Not visions, demonstrations. Villages emptied in seconds. Bodies lifted gently, almost tenderly, into openings in the ice that closed behind them like mouths. No struggle, no blood, just disappearance. The implication was unmistakable. Resistance would not be violent. It would be efficient. Allow me to feed. The presence continued. Or you will become the feeding. Panic spread unevenly. Some screamed. Some prayed. Some went perfectly still, minds fracturing under the weight of being directly addressed by something that did not recognize them as equals. The thing clarified its terms. It did not require all of Greenland. Only access, certain fjords, certain currents, certain depths beneath the ice where its true body could continue to grow unseen. In return, it promised restraint. No more disappearances. No more sickness. The ice would hold for a time. But the cost was clear. Greenland would no longer belong to those living on it. It would become pasture. A managed territory for something that viewed humanity as seasonal wildlife at best. Some argued that survival was survival, no matter the price. Others refused, saying that a life lived by permission was not life at all. Families split. Villages fractured overnight, not by distance but by belief. And beneath every argument lay the same certainty. The aberration was not bluffing. It had already tasted them. It knew their numbers. It knew how easily they could be consumed. The final message came just before dawn, as the ice began to move again. Decide. You have always lived at my mercy. You simply never knew. Greenland, ancient and patient, did not answer. But the ice creaked, not in warning this time, but in preparation. They did not approach it with weapons. No harpoons, no explosives, no defiance. They approached it the only way Greenland's people ever had approached forces larger than themselves, with restraint, precision, and the humility of those who know they are small. The elders chose a fjord the aberration had already marked. Ice thinned from below, water unnaturally still. They went out at dawn, 3 kayaks only, moving slowly, deliberately, as if sudden motion might be interpreted as aggression. The sea opened for them. Not physically but attentively. Pressure gathered in the air. Thoughts grew heavy. Speech felt distant, as though words had to travel through water before reaching the mouth. Still, one of the elders spoke aloud, knowing full well that sound was unnecessary. We know this land, he said. We know hunger. We know balance. If you feed without limit, there will be nothing left. Not even for you. The response came instantly, sharp and cold. Balance is a temporary solution invented by fragile systems. The water beneath them shifted. Not waves, rearrangements. Shapes moved far below, too vast to resolve, like continents reconsidering their position. Another elder spoke, voice shaking but steady enough. We can offer boundaries. Seasons. Places you do not touch. Children you do not take. There was a pause then. The first true pause. When the presence answered, it felt almost curious. You negotiate as if you matter individually. The fjord darkened. The kayaks creaked as unseen pressure brushed past them, testing, measuring. One elder gagged, coughing seawater though his mouth had never touched it. "You are biomass," the presence continued. "But you are aware biomass. That is unusual. That is why you are still speaking." The thing considered their proposal, not morally but structurally. Feeding cycles, population density, long-term yield. Greenland was not prey in its eyes. It was a system. Finally it offered terms. Not mercy, efficiency. Certain settlements would be abandoned entirely. Others would remain untouched, provided strict limits were followed. Fishing quotas dictated not by humans but by it. Access to specific fjords surrendered permanently. Any violation, accidental or not, would be answered immediately. And then came the condition that broke them. "You will provide me with representatives. Not sacrifices. Not prisoners. Peasants. People who would remain close to the feeding zones, permanently connected, partially altered, intermediaries through which the aberration could monitor compliance. They would not die quickly. They would not remain fully human either." Silence fell across the kayaks. One elder whispered, barely audible, "And if we refuse?" The sea rose 1/2 meter without wind. Ice cracked inland far away. "Then negotiation ends." The presence replied. "And consumption begins." They returned to shore changed. Not wounded. Not marked. But carrying the weight of a truth Greenland had never faced before. This was not a force that could be respected into restraint, nor fought into retreat. It was a tenant demanding formal recognition. And now the people had to decide something far worse than survival. They had to decide who they were willing to let become less than human, so that the rest might remain so. For a little while longer. Negotiation failed the moment it was attempted. The aberration had never intended to listen, only to observe how they begged. When the elders returned from the fjord, the presence withdrew, not in retreat, but in preparation. The sea went quiet in a way that erased hope. Even the wind avoided the coast. That same night, the first warning was delivered. Not to leaders, not to elders, but to the ordinary. A fishing family in a northern settlement vanished between dusk and dawn. Their house remained intact. Lamps still burned. Food sat half-prepared on the table, cooling. There were no signs of struggle, only wet footprints leading from the doorway straight onto solid ice. The footprints stopped abruptly. At sunrise, the ice beneath the village turned translucent. People could see shapes moving below. Slow, deliberate forms circling something newly introduced into the depths. Bones surfaced later. Clean. Polished. Arranged carefully along the shoreline. Not scattered, but displayed. The message arrived immediately after, forced into every conscious mind like a blade sliding between thoughts. This is restraint. Panic spread unevenly, exactly as the aberration intended. Some fled inland, dragging children through snow and stone with no plan beyond distance. Others locked themselves inside, as if walls could argue on their behalf. The second warning came faster. A supply boat failed to return. Then its wreckage washed ashore, not broken by storms but folded inward, crushed with architectural precision. Inside, the crew was gone. Only their voices returned, echoing faintly through radios across the coast for hours afterward, repeating fragments of sentences that made no sense when assembled. Sleep became impossible. The presence no longer waited for night. Pressed into waking hours, into thoughts, into reflexes. People found themselves standing too close to the shore without remembering walking there. Children stopped responding to their names. Dogs refused food and stared at the sea until restrained or sedated. Then the aberration spoke again. No longer cold, no longer distant. Now it was angry. You misunderstand your position. You are not hosts. You are interference. Entire sections of coastline were declared inaccessible, not by signs but by consequence. Anyone who crossed invisible boundaries simply did not return. Sometimes screams echoed briefly from beneath the ice, distorted, stretched long enough to be unmistakable, short enough to be instructional. The elders realized too late. This was not negotiation escalating into violence. This was domestication failing, and being replaced by extermination. The aberration had begun selective feeding. Strong adults first, then children old enough to walk. Always visible enough that the lesson traveled faster than fear. Observe, it said as villages watched their own disappear. Learn what refusal costs. Greenland had endured famine, cold, isolation, and loss for centuries. But it had never faced something that learned faster than it suffered. And now, as the ice shifted and the sea opened wider than it ever had before, one truth became unavoidable. The aberration did not need permission anymore. It was no longer asking to feed. It was teaching Greenland what it meant to be food. They did not leave. That, more than any refusal, surprised the aberration. Evacuation was discussed, of course. Whispered first, then argued, then abandoned. There was nowhere to go that the cold would not follow. Nowhere that panic would not fracture people faster than the thing beneath the ice ever could. To flee would mean scattering, and scattering would mean being hunted one by one. So they stayed. Not out of bravery. Out of stubborn continuity. Greenland's people had learned long ago that survival here was never about winning. It was about enduring longer than what tried to erase you. And so, while the aberration fed and threatened and demonstrated its reach, the locals did something it had not predicted. They began to observe it back. Patterns emerged. The feeding followed pressure gradients, not proximity. The thing avoided certain rock formations inland, ancient faults where the ice was thinner but the ground beneath vibrated differently. Old hunters remembered these places. Areas where sound behaved strangely, where even storms seemed muted. They noticed something else. The aberration hated stillness that was not its own. When fires were kept burning all night near the shore, activity beneath the ice slowed. When drums were struck, not loudly but rhythmically, deep and slow, The pressure in the air shifted, unfocused, as if the presence lost coherence for brief moments. It was not pain. It was interference. The elders spoke of old stories never meant to be literal. Tales of the land humming itself closed, of glaciers that sang to keep worse things asleep. These were not myths of heroes. They were instructions, disguised as stories so they would not be forgotten. They began carefully. Stone markers were placed along fault lines. Fires burned in patterns visible from above, not to be seen by eyes, but to disrupt whatever sensed through pressure and resonance. Drumming was coordinated between villages, never constant, never predictable. The aberration noticed. Its response was immediate and violent. Ice shattered inland, far from the coast. A hunting party disappeared without warning. The voice returned, sharper than ever, tearing through thought like broken glass. You are altering the environment. This will not protect you. But something had changed. For the first time the presence sounded strained. Its movements grew less coordinated. Feeding became erratic. Entire nights passed without disappearance. Not mercy but recalculation. The thing was vast, but it was not infinitely adaptable. It required certain conditions, certain harmonies between ice, water, and depth. And the people were learning how to disturb those harmonies. They were not trying to kill it. They were trying to make Greenland uninhabitable for it again. The elders issued a quiet instruction across settlements. No heroics. No sacrifices. No confrontations. Only patience. Only disruption. Only refusal to behave like prey. The aberration pressed harder, threatened louder, consumed more brutally. But it could no longer do so everywhere at once. Its attention fractured, stretched thin across a land that refused to panic in unison. Greenland had always survived by being sparse, difficult, and unwelcoming. Now, deliberately, it was becoming so again, even to the thing that had waited beneath it for millennia. And beneath the ice, something vast and unfinished began to realize a dangerous truth. This population might not defeat it, but they might make feeding here no longer worth the cost. The shift was sudden. One day there were threats. The next there were absences. Villages did not scream. They did not burn. They simply stopped existing. A settlement on the western coast went silent overnight. No distress call. No final transmission. When a scouting party reached the place days later, they found houses intact, doors open, meals unfinished, and the ground beneath the village hollowed out, as if the land itself had been eaten from below. Entire foundations had collapsed inward, dragging everything and everyone down into black water that steamed faintly in the cold air. The aberration no longer bothered with messages after that. It had moved past instruction. It was now enforcing inevitability. The sea rose higher with each feeding, not flooding chaotically, but advancing with intent, selecting points of weakness, emotional as much as geological. Villages that argued internally vanished faster. Communities that hesitated, that delayed decisions, were punished first. The presence returned to the minds of the survivors, no longer speaking as an equal force addressing resistance, but as a mechanism announcing outcome. Your numbers are declining at an acceptable rate. Adaptation window closing. People saw things they were never meant to witness. Children taken while still holding their parents' hands. Elders lifted gently into the ice. Mouths open in prayer that cut off mid-word. Shapes beneath the surface growing more defined, more coordinated, as if fed not only by bodies, but by fear itself. The disruption tactics stopped working. Drumming drew attention now. Fires became beacons. Stillness invited annihilation. The aberration had learned. It adjusted its feeding patterns to punish resistance specifically. Any attempt to interfere was answered with immediate, disproportionate loss. One night of coordinated sound was repaid with the erasure of an entire inland settlement, a place that had never even seen the sea. The message, finally, was unmistakable. You are not my problem. You are my solution. Panic fractured what patience had held together. Some people fled alone, abandoning families to increase their chances. Others gathered in tight groups, believing numbers might confuse the thing, only to be consumed all at once, efficiently, without spectacle. Greenland began to empty in patches, like rot spreading through ice. Maps lost relevance. Names lost meaning. Memory became the only currency left. And still the people remained. Those who survived did so by becoming smaller, quieter, reducing light, movement, emotion. They learned to live as shadows in their own land, existing just enough not to attract attention, but never enough to feel alive. The aberration was no longer merely feeding. It was clearing space, preparing Greenland for something larger, something final, a state where human presence would be reduced to occasional, tolerated residue like lichen on stone. As the ice continued to crack inward and the sea pushed further into the land, one truth settled heavily among the remaining survivors. This was no longer a fight for survival. It was a fight to ensure that someone somewhere would still remember that Greenland had once been inhabited by people, not just consumed by something that learned how to threaten, and then decided it no longer needed to. They gathered in what remained. Not one village, not two. All of them. Survivors crossed ice fields and ruined coastlines, traveled inland through places no one had named before, carrying children who no longer cried and elders who no longer spoke. Took weeks. Some arrived too late. Some did not arrive at all. But enough did. And for the first time since the aberration had risen, Greenland spoke with a single voice. The idea did not come quickly. It emerged slowly, painfully, through exhaustion and memory. Someone recalled old wartime mirrors used to signal ships. Another spoke of myths where light itself was a weapon, not against flesh, but against what had never fully belonged to the world. An elder remembered something crucial. The aberration avoided direct exposure, not light focus. Thrived in depth, pressure, diffusion. It fed where sunlight fractured and weakened, where ice scattered it into harmless shimmer. But when light was gathered, concentrated, disciplined, it hesitated. So they conceived the unthinkable. A mirror large enough to wound the deep. Not a single surface, but a structure. Thousands of polished panels scavenged from wreckage, abandoned technology, metal stripped from ruins, ice-smoothed stone coated and aligned by hand. They built it inland, on ancient rock the aberration avoided, where the ground hummed differently underfoot. The mirror faced the sun. Not the summer sun, too gentle, too wandering, but the low, brutal Arctic sun of late spring, when it hangs near the horizon and burns sideways, relentless, unblinking. For weeks, the aberration noticed nothing. It continued to feed. Villages vanished as the mirror rose silently behind the mountains, each panel aligned with agonizing precision. There was no celebration, no hope spoken aloud. Only work, hands bleeding in the cold, eyes ruined by reflected glare. Then, on the chosen day, they waited. The sun reached the correct angle, and the mirror answered. Light did not scatter, converged. A single, blinding column tore across ice and sea, cutting through fog as if it were smoke. Where it struck the surface, water boiled in the cold air. Ice screamed, not cracked but screamed, as if something beneath it were suddenly aware of pain. The aberration reacted instantly. The sea convulsed. Entire fjords heaved upward, waves frozen mid-rise by shock. The presence slammed into every mind at once, no longer measured, no longer controlled. This time it screamed back. This is not permitted. The light burned deeper. Not fire, something worse. The focused sun stripped away pressure, depth, concealment. It forced the aberration into definition, into a shape that could not exist under direct, unforgiving clarity. Vast forms surged beneath the surface, thrashing, tearing at ice that no longer protected it. The smell filled the air. Scorched brine, ancient tissue, something old being undone. People collapsed, hands over ears, blood leaking from noses and eyes as the presence unraveled, its thoughts fragmenting into incoherent noise. You will blind yourselves. The mirror held. For minutes that felt like hours, the sun burned the deep. And then silence. The sea did not calm. Emptied. Water rushed outward, as if something massive had let go. Ice collapsed inward, sealing caverns, crushing whatever remained beneath kilometers of frozen pressure. The light faded as clouds finally intervened, merciful or indifferent. No one could tell. When it was over, the mirror stood cracked and blackened, panels warped by heat they were never meant to endure. Greenland remained. Guard. Hollowed. Alive. They did not cheer. They dismantled the mirror immediately, scattering its pieces across the land, burying some, sinking others, erasing the geometry so it could never be used again, by them or by something else watching from the dark. Because they understood the cost. They had not destroyed the aberration. They had taught it that this land could hurt it. And in Greenland, pain is often enough to send even the oldest things back into silence, at least for a while. The light did not stop. Even as the aberration burned, even as its vastness writhed beneath the ice, the mirror continued to pour the sun into it with merciless precision. The focused glare stripped away what little coherence it still possessed. Whatever eyes it had, spread, multiplied, unfinished, were the first to fail. It went blind. And in that blindness it panicked. The sea surged wildly now, no longer deliberate, no longer calculating. Ice shattered in every direction as the aberration tried to flee downward, inward, anywhere the light could not follow. But the mirror had done its true work already. It had fixed the thing in place, forcing it into a form that could be reached. That was when the people moved. Not as villages, not as families, as one. They came with harpoons, with tools never meant for flesh like this, with ropes woven for storms and weights forged for anchoring the impossible. They struck where the light had burned deepest, where the aberration's substance had thinned into something vulnerable, something screaming without sound. It did not beg. It did not threaten. It howled, not into minds anymore, but into the air itself, a vibration so deep it cracked stone and split ice far inland. The sound carried across Greenland like an ending being announced. And then, piece by piece, they killed it. What remained was vast, blackened, half-solid, a corpse that refused to cool, that steamed and bled brine even in the cold. Took days to move what they could. Weeks to decide what to do with it. They chose the center of the island. A place far from the sea. A place of ancient rock. A place where nothing had ever risen from below. There they built a pyre unlike any fire Greenland had ever seen. Stone and ice formed its base. The remains of the aberration were stacked carefully, reverently even, not out of respect but out of caution. This thing had fed on disorder. They would not give it that in death. When they lit it, the fire burned wrong. The flames were too dark at their core, edged with colors no one had names for. Heat rolled outward in waves that felt heavy, pressing rather than rising. The smell carried memories, salt, iron, deep water, old fear. The fire burned for 7 days. During that time no one slept. People watched in silence as the last fragments of the aberration collapsed inward, consumed not just by flame, but by exposure. Denied darkness, denied depth, denied the cold concealment it had depended on. On the final night, the fire flared once, violently, then fell in on itself. Ash settled across the snow like gray pollen. When morning came, the center of Greenland was quiet. Too quiet. They buried the ashes deep, mixed with stone and sealed beneath layers of ice and rock. No markers. No stories carved. Only memory, passed carefully, reluctantly, from one voice to another. Because some victories are not meant to be celebrated. They are meant to be remembered as warnings. The sea returned to itself. The ice grew still again. Animals slowly came back. Greenland endured, as it always had. But now, at the heart of the island, beneath stone and frozen earth, lies the residue of something that once believed it could claim this land. And every so often, when the ground hums faintly and fires burn a little hotter than they should, the elders remind the young of a simple truth. Even the oldest darkness can be blinded, burned, and reduced to ash, if enough people choose to stand in the light together.